The soft ones. The station Varith. 7 floated in the middle of space, like a giant metal flower. It had many rings and levels, and lights blinked all over it in different colors. Ships came and went, every hour. Some were long and thin, some were wide and heavy, some made sounds that human ears could not fully hear. Varith 7 was home to many species, and on most days, it was a peaceful place. Humans had been part of the Galactic Concord for 31 years. 31 years was not a long time for most species. The Velhari had been members for 4,000 years, the Quarath for nearly 9,000. The Dreth Collective had joined and left and rejoined 3 times over 6 centuries. But humans were new. They were young, and the rest of the galaxy knew it. Most species in the Concord were polite about it. They smiled at humans, or did whatever their faces allowed. That meant something like a smile. And they spoke slowly, as if humans needed extra time to understand things. They called humanity promising. They called humans spirited. They gave them small tasks in the Concord, and watched to see if they could handle them. Nobody was afraid of humans. That was simply the truth of it. Humans were small by galactic standards. They had no natural armor, no claws worth mentioning. Their bones broke, their skin tore. They got sick from things other species didn't even notice. They lived short lives, and they spent those short lives becoming attached to things, to places, to objects, to other people, and most strongly of all, to their young. That last part, the attachment to their young, was something the rest of the galaxy found both charming and a little strange. Humans would do almost anything for their children. They spent enormous energy keeping them safe. They told them stories at night, so they would not be afraid of the dark. They held their hands when they were scared. They counted their small fingers and checked their breathing while they slept. It was sweet, most species agreed. Very human. Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo had lived on Varith 7 for 6 years. She was a tall woman, with close-cut hair and sharp eyes, that missed nothing. She was good at her job, which was mostly talking to other ambassadors, talking to Concord officials, talking to species that communicated in ways that required a translator just to begin. She was patient and careful, and she never raised her voice. She had not raised her voice once in 6 years. On the station with her were 12 human children. They were the sons and daughters of scientists, engineers, and diplomats. The youngest was 6 years old, a small girl named Mira who carried a stuffed animal everywhere and asked questions constantly. The oldest was 15, a quiet boy named Jonas who had already started learning 3 alien languages on his own. They went to a small school on level 4 of the station. They played in the observation rooms and pressed their faces against the glass to watch the stars. They were curious and loud and full of life, and every species on the station had grown fond of them in some way. Even the Quarath analysts, who were not fond of anything by nature, had started leaving small gifts near the school entrance. The children were not soldiers. They were not officials. They were just children. The Dreth Collective arrived at Varith 7 without warning on a Tuesday, though Tuesday meant nothing in space. It was simply the name the human crew used for that day. 3 Dreth warships came out of faster-than-light travel and stopped just outside the station's neutral zone. They were large ships, dark-colored, covered in sharp angles. The Dreth liked sharp angles. They liked things that looked dangerous because they believed appearance was the first weapon. Commander Vrath Khan led the Dreth delegation. He was tall even by Dreth standards, with heavy scales across his neck and shoulders, and eyes that were a pale, cold yellow. He had won several campaigns in his career, and he had a very clear idea of how power worked. Power, he believed, was simple. You had it, or you did not. If you had it, you used it. If the other side did not have it, they would bend. The Dreth wanted mining rights to 3 asteroid systems near the station's sector. The Concord had already said no twice through proper diplomatic channels. Vrath Khan had decided that proper diplomatic channels were for species who needed them. He sent his soldiers into the station under a temporary access agreement, something the Concord allowed for crew rest and resupply. It was a rule meant for peaceful purposes. The Dreth used it as a door. 16 Dreth soldiers moved through the station quietly at first. Then they moved to level 4. It happened fast. One moment the children were in the middle of their afternoon lessons. The next, Dreth soldiers were standing in the doorway of the school. The teacher, a human woman named Dr. Alinta Walsh, stood up from her chair. She put herself between the soldiers and the children, without thinking about it, the way humans always did. She told them to stop. They did not stop. The children were taken to a sealed room on the Dreth ship, and told they were guests. Mira held her stuffed animal, and did not cry, because she did not fully understand what was happening yet. Jonas understood, and he put his arm around the younger ones, and told them it would be all right. He said it with more confidence than he felt. Vrath Khan sent his message to Ambassador Okonkwo 40 minutes later. It was simple and direct, as Dreth messages usually were. The children would be returned when the Concord signed over the mining rights. The children were not harmed. They would remain not harmed, as long as things moved quickly. He expected quick movement. Humans, in his experience, were a soft species. Soft species made quick decisions, when the thing they loved was on the table. He was not wrong about the last part. Sarah Okonkwo read the message in her office. She sat at her desk, and she read it twice. Then she set it down flat on the surface, and she did not move for a moment. A Velhari diplomat named Oris was standing nearby. He later said that in that moment, something happened to the ambassador's face that he could not describe well in any language he knew. It was not panic. It was not grief. It was something older than both of those things. Something that made the air in the room feel different, the way the air feels different before a storm that has not arrived yet. Oris took a small step back, without meaning to. Okonkwo picked up the communications device on her desk. She pressed the connection for Earth Fleet Command. When the line opened, she said, without any change in her calm and steady voice, "This is Ambassador Okonkwo on Vareth, 7. I need a Priority Omega connection to Fleet Command. Right now." Priority Omega was not a code that got used often. In 31 years of humanity's membership in the Concord, it had never been used once. She ended the connection. Then she looked at the Dreth message one more time. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The message had already been sent. And somewhere far away, in the dark between stars, engines began to warm up. Vrath Khan, sitting on his ship, finished his meal and waited. He was sure he would hear back soon. Soft species always came back quickly when their young were involved. He was right about that too. He just did not understand what coming back was going to look like. What the databases don't say. Tessivan had 8 arms, and the kind of mind that liked order. He worked in the deep archives of the Concord Intelligence Bureau, and his job was to know things before other people needed to know them. He was very good at this job. He had worked there for 40 years, and he had read files on every species in the Concord at least 3 times over. He thought he had a good understanding of everyone. He had not spent much time on the human files. There had not seemed to be a reason. Humans were new. Humans were small. The files on them were relatively short compared to the ancient species, with their thousands of years of recorded history. He had read a summary once, filed it in the correct part of his memory, and moved on. Now, 3 hours after the news from Vareth, 7 had come through. His supervisor had told him to pull everything on human military behavior and prepare a response assessment. The Concord needed to know how the humans would react, so they could advise a smooth resolution. The working assumption was that humans, being rational and physically weak, would probably accept a negotiated solution. Tessivan sat down with all 8 arms, opened the full human archive, and began to read. An hour later he had not moved. He had stopped blinking, which was unusual for his species. The human file was not short. The summary had been short because someone had made a summary. The actual file was enormous. It went back thousands of years into their own planetary history, long before they ever reached space, and it was filled almost entirely with war. Not small wars, not border disputes, wars that consumed whole continents, wars that humans fought with sticks, and then with metal, and then with machines, and then with weapons that could erase cities in a single moment. Tessivan read about something called the First World War, in which humans dug holes in the ground and charged at each other across open land under fire, dying by the millions, and kept going anyway. He read about the Second World War, in which they split the atom, a thing that took most species centuries of careful science, and then dropped it on a city before the paint was dry on the formula. He read about conflicts with no name, just numbers. Millions dead here, tens of millions there. He read about a period called the Cold War, in which two groups of humans spent decades pointing weapons capable of ending all life on their planet at each other, and somehow didn't use them. Not because they weren't angry, but because they were patient, because they were waiting. He read a line from one of their oldest recorded books. "Whom shall I send, and who will go?" And then the answer from a soldier, "Here I am. Send me." He sat with that for a long time. He moved on to more recent files. Human behavior in the 31 years since joining the Concorde. There had been no wars with other Concorde species, which he had expected. What he had not expected was the psychological profiles. A team of Quorath researchers had studied human behavior in detail and written a report. He pulled it up. The report was titled, Humans' Threat Assessment in Conflict Scenarios. It had several sections. He went straight to the section on what the researchers called protective response triggers. He read it slowly. Humans, the report explained, had two emotional states that looked similar from the outside, but were very different. The first was ordinary anger, which was loud and visible, and faded quickly. The second was something the researchers had difficulty naming. They settled on the phrase, cold resolve. It was what happened when a human decided that something had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. When that happened, the human did not become louder. They became quieter. They became focused in a way that researchers found unsettling to observe. Their pulse slowed. Their hands stopped shaking. They stopped arguing and started planning. The strongest trigger for cold resolve, the report said, was a threat to human offspring. Tessivon turned to the last page of the Quorath report. There was a note at the bottom, written by the lead researcher, that was separate from the formal findings. It read, "We recommend extreme caution in any scenario involving human children. Humans do not fight to survive. They fight until there is nothing left to fight with, and then they use that. We have no category for this. We are adding one." Below the note, in smaller text, was a classification tag that had been added later by a Concorde safety official. It read, "Threat classification humans defending offspring. Do not engage." Tessivon stared at that line for a long time. Then he reached for his communication panel to warn the Dreth. He needed to tell them what they had done. He needed to explain, clearly and quickly, that this was not a negotiation anymore, and hadn't been one since the moment the soldiers walked into that school. He pressed connect. The line was busy. He tried again. Still busy. He switched to a different channel and called the Dreth ship directly. No answer. He tried the Concorde's general emergency channel. He got through to an operator who told him the Dreth were not accepting outside communications at this time. Commander Vrath Khan had apparently closed all incoming lines while he waited for the human response. Tessivon put down the communicator. He turned back to the screen and went to the last section of the human file he hadn't read yet. It was a small folder labeled Fleet Response Protocols. He opened it. Inside was a document called Priority Omega. He had never heard of it before. He read the definition. Priority Omega was a signal used only when human lives, specifically the lives of human children, were under direct threat. It was not a request for help. It was not a call for negotiation. It was a signal that meant, "We are coming." It bypassed all normal chain of command. Any human fleet vessel that received it was authorized to move immediately, without waiting for orders, without approval from the Concorde, without delay of any kind. He checked the timestamp on the signal that had come from Vareth, 7. Ambassador Okonkwo had sent it 3 hours and 14 minutes ago. Tessivon did a quick calculation. The nearest human fleet vessel at maximum engine burn would arrive at Vareth 7 inches, approximately 11 hours. Maybe less, if they pushed the engines past standard safety limits. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. He had spent 40 years in this office reading files on dangerous species. He had read about species with acid blood, species that could survive in open vacuum, species whose children were already apex predators at birth. He had read about wars that lasted centuries. None of those files had given him the feeling this one was giving him now, because those species were dangerous, because they were powerful, because nature had built them to be hard, and sharp, and deadly. Humans were dangerous for a completely different reason. They were soft. They were small. They were fragile, in almost every physical way. But they had decided, somewhere deep in the long history of their painful, bloody, extraordinary existence, that there were things worth going through any wall for. And they had gotten very, very good at going through walls. He looked at the last note in the file one more time. The one that said, "Do not engage." Then he looked at the timestamp of the priority Omega signal again. He thought about the Dreth commander, sitting on his ship, eating his meal, waiting for the soft humans to come and beg. Tessivan, who had not felt fear in 11 years, felt something close to it now. Not for himself. For the Dreth. He closed the file. He did not try to call again. There was no point. The answer was already on its way, burning through space at maximum speed, and there was nothing left for anyone to do but wait and see what happened when it arrived. He opened a blank document and began writing a new threat classification report for humanity. He had a feeling it was going to need a lot of new categories. The Scream. Wrath Khan had fought in 11 campaigns. He had taken stations, cracked open enemy ships, and negotiated the surrender of 3 different governments. He knew what he was doing. He had always known what he was doing. He was not a reckless commander, he was a precise one. Every move he made was calculated. Every risk was understood before he took it. Taking the children had been calculated. It had been precise. It was the kind of move that worked every time with soft species. You found what they loved, and you put your hand on it, and then you waited for them to come to the table. It was not cruel. It was just efficient. The children were not harmed. They were being fed. The little one with the stuffed animal had even been given extra food because she'd looked hungry, though she hadn't been. She had simply looked at the food, and then at the soldier, and the soldier had, without fully understanding why, given her more. Wrath Khan did not know about that last part. He would not have approved of it. He sat in his command chair and waited. It had been 14 hours. That was longer than he had expected, but not concerning. Sometimes the slow ones needed time to cry first. He understood. He would give them a little more time. His communications officer turned around. "Commander, there is a ship." Wrath Khan looked up. "Concord diplomatic vessel?" "No, sir." A pause. "Human fleet ship. Designation EFS Unbroken Tide. It has just dropped out of faster-than-light travel." Wrath Khan stood. He walked to the main window. He could see it now, a human warship, sitting in space about as close to the station as a ship could get, without actually touching it. It was too close. It had come out of FTL travel far too close. The distance alone was almost impossible. No ship was supposed to decelerate from FTL that fast. The forces involved would destroy a ship. And yet there it was. Its hull was glowing from the burn. Heat was still bleeding off the surface in visible waves. The unbroken tide had pushed its engines past every reasonable limit to get here this fast. And it looked like it had. It looked like a ship that had sprinted so hard, its lungs were still burning. Wrath Khan was not afraid. He had 6 warships. The humans had 1. But something about the way that ship sat there still, and perfectly aimed, like a finger pointed directly at him, made his jaw tighten. "They're hailing us," his communications officer said. "Put it through." The screen opened. There was a human woman on the other side. She was not dressed in the formal clothes that ambassadors wore. She was in dark tactical gear. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face was still, the way a deep lake is still not calm, but heavy. Behind her, her bridge crew were all standing. Not at their stations. Standing. Facing the screen together. She did not say hello. She did not give her name or rank. She looked directly into the camera. And she spoke. "You have our children. You have 30 minutes to return them, unharmed, to the station's neutral bay. Every single one of them." If any one of them has so much as a bruise that wasn't there before, if any one of them is frightened in a way your people caused, I will not leave enough of your fleet for your own families to identify the pieces. I want them walking out of that bay in 30 minutes. This is not a negotiation. I am not asking. This is a countdown. The screen went dark. She had closed the channel herself. The bridge of the Dreth ship was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft electronic hum of the ship's systems, and the very faint beep of the timer that Vrath Khan's communications officer had quietly started running the moment the human said, 30 minutes. Vrath Khan's second-in-command was a general named Sorath. He was not a young soldier. He had been in more battles than Vrath Khan, and had the scars to prove it. He had seen hard things, and he had done hard things, and there was very little in the galaxy that made him feel uncertain. He turned to Vrath Khan now, and his voice was low and very serious. Commander, I think we should give them the children. Vrath Khan looked at him. We have 6 ships. Yes. They have one. Yes. Which is damaged from its own approach. I know. Then explain to me. Vrath Khan said slowly. Why you look like that? Sorath was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have fought a lot of species, Commander. I have learned that the dangerous ones are easy to identify before the fight begins. They are large. They are armed. They move like they know they are dangerous. He paused. That woman did not move like she knew she was dangerous. She moved like she did not care whether she was or not. That is different. That is much worse. Vrath Khan looked back at the screen, which was dark now. He thought about what Sorath had said. He thought about his 6 ships, and the humans one. He thought about his career and his reputation and the mining rights that had started all of this. And then his pride spoke louder than his instincts, the way pride always does. Lock weapons, he said. On a neutral observation vessel docked nearby, the Velhari ambassador Oris was watching everything through his ship's sensors. He had been watching since the human ship arrived. He had seen the transmission. He had seen Vrath Khan's face when the woman closed the channel. He had seen Sorath's expression. He opened a last communication to the Dreth ship. He was not sure anyone would read it. He sent it anyway. You have made a terrible mistake. You did not take hostages. You removed the safety from a weapon you do not understand. Whatever you think is about to happen, it isn't. Run. He sent it, and then he moved his observation ship 3 full kilometers further from the station, because he was a careful person, and he believed in being far from things that were about to go wrong. Inside the sealed room on the Dreth ship, Mira was sitting on the floor with her stuffed animal in her lap. The Dreth guard at the door was large and armored, and his yellow eyes moved around the room constantly. Mira had spent some time studying him. Why do you have scales? She asked him. The guard looked down at her. My species has scales, he said, after a pause. Do they keep you warm? Another pause. They keep me protected. Mira thought about this. My mom has a coat that keeps her warm and protected, she said helpfully. It's red. She says red is a power color. The guard did not respond. Are you going to let us go home? Mira asked. The guard's jaw moved slightly. He looked at the door. He looked at the clock on the wall of the room, which showed 21 minutes remaining, on a countdown that someone had put there without being asked. Some crew member somewhere had put it up without orders, quietly, because they had heard the human woman's message, and they believed in being prepared. The guard looked back at the small human child with her stuffed animal. He did not answer her question, but his hand moved toward the comm unit on his belt. He pressed it. This is post 7, he said quietly. I think the commander should know that the children are completely unharmed. Every one of them. Just in case that information is needed quickly. He didn't know exactly why he said it. He just felt, very strongly, that it was important that particular fact be easy to find. 17 minutes left on the clock. Outside, the unbroken tide did not move. It just sat there, glowing faintly, pointing at the Dreth fleet like a decision that had already been made. Humanity's oldest law. The Dreth fired first. It was not a full attack at the start. It was a warning shot, a single burst of energy weapon fire aimed just ahead of the unbroken tide's bow, meant to tell the human ship to back off and let the situation breathe. That was how the Dreth preferred to begin. Show the edge of the blade before you swing it. Give the other side a chance to make a smart choice. The unbroken tide turned, not away, toward. Its engines lit up, and it came straight at the Dreth formation, accelerating hard, and the Dreth fleet opened fire in full, because there was no other option now. Energy blasts hit the human ship along its left side. The shields took the first round. The second round hit armor. The third round punched through a section of the outer hull and tore away part of one of the engine housings. The unbroken tide did not stop. It used the damaged engine. The burning, venting plasma from the torn housing, which any other ship would have sealed off immediately to save itself, was directed by the crew into the space ahead of the ship, creating a hot, churning cloud of ionized gas that scattered the Dreth targeting systems and blinded two of the lead warships for nearly a minute. 1 minute, in a space battle, is an enormous amount of time. Inside the unbroken tide, Captain Dara Vasquez was strapped into her command chair, and her voice was flat and fast and completely steady. She called targets. She called adjustments. She listened to her crew and answered them, and made decisions faster than most commanders Vasquez had ever trained against. A piece of ceiling panel had come loose during the second hit and struck her shoulder. She had not acknowledged it. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Ramos, was hit by a bolt of shrapnel from a console that exploded during the third strike. He went down. He came back up 11 seconds later, one hand pressed to his side, and kept calling targeting solutions from the floor, because the angle was actually better from down there. Nobody told him to get up. Nobody told him to stay down. He made his own choice, the way humans do. The Dreth fleet was bigger, 6 warships against 1, plus they had more firepower, more armor, and they had not just burned their engines half to death getting here. By every reasonable measurement, the unbroken tide should not have been competitive in this fight. But the Dreth fought like a fleet. They had formations, they had procedures, they had a logical approach to space combat that had been developed over centuries and worked very well against logical opponents. The unbroken tide did not fight like a fleet. It fought like the thing it was, a single ship crewed by people who had a reason to be here that had nothing to do with tactics or formations or wind conditions. Vasquez did not fly the ship to win the battle. She flew it to get past the battle, and there is a difference. She accepted damage that no sane commander would accept, used it, and kept moving. She flew the ship into positions that made her crew grab their harnesses and her instruments scream overload warnings, because being exactly where the enemy didn't expect was worth more than being safe. The Dreth could not model her. Their combat systems kept generating probabilities, and the probabilities kept being wrong, because the probabilities assumed the human ship cared about surviving the next 5 minutes. The human ship was not thinking about the next 5 minutes. The first Dreth warship was crippled in 8 minutes. Not destroyed. The unbroken tide hadn't gone for the kill. Vasquez had aimed for the engines, cleanly and precisely, because she wanted them stopped, not dead. She was not here to kill Dreth. She was here for 12 children. The second Dreth ship went dark 11 minutes after that. Its weapons array was gone. The third took a strike to its power core that knocked it into a slow, helpless spin. 3 ships in under 20 minutes. 1 human vessel, damaged, glowing, trailing smoke from 2 hull breaches. Still moving forward. Then the Dreth long-range sensors picked up something new. Multiple ships dropping out of FTL at the outer edge of the sector. The communications officer called out the identification signatures with a slight crack in his voice. Human fleet. 7 ships. They had not been called. There had been no second order, no formal request, no approved deployment through Concord channels. They had received the priority Omega signal 3 hours and 14 minutes ago, and they had come, without waiting to be asked, because that was what the signal meant, and they knew it. 7 human warships spread out across the Dreth fleet's exit vectors in a quiet, organized arc. They did not fire. They did not even raise weapons to active status. They just stopped there, in the dark, and blocked every route home. Vrathkon stared at his sensors. He had started this with 6 ships and a plan. He now had 3 damaged ships, 3 dead ones, 7 new human ships at his back, and the original human ship still coming at him from the front. It was still coming. It was trailing smoke, and one of its stabilizers was clearly failing, and it was still coming, straight at him, and it had not slowed down once. He thought about Sorath's words. She moved like she did not care whether she was dangerous or not. He opened the channel. Human vessel. We surrender. We. Children, Vasquez said. One word. Vrathkon paused. Then he understood. He turned to his crew. Release them. All of them. Now. Neutral bay. Move. It took 4 minutes. 4 of the longest minutes Vrathkon had ever sat through. He watched the sensor display. The unbroken tide had stopped its approach. It was holding position. Waiting. He had the strange feeling that if the transfer took too long, the ship would start moving again regardless of the surrender. The children came through the neutral bay. 12 of them, walking in a line, escorted by 2 Dreth crew members, who moved with the careful energy of people very aware of what was aimed at them. The youngest, the small girl with the stuffed animal, was first through the bay door. She walked right up to the first human crew member she saw, looked up at him, and said, "I told the guard about my mom's red coat." The crew member looked at her for 1 second. Then he picked her up and held her tight, and his face was doing something he probably didn't want anyone to see. The moment the door sealed behind the last child, something happened across all 7 incoming human ships and the unbroken tide at the same time. The weapons went cold. The aggressive positioning relaxed. It was not a decision anyone announced. It just happened, like pressure releasing from a closed container when the lid comes off. Vasquez accepted the Dreth surrender in a voice that was professional and even courteous. She offered medical assistance to any Dreth crew injured in the fighting. She outlined the terms clearly and without anger. She was, in that moment, almost gentle. General Sorath sat in his chair on the damaged Dreth flagship and watched the human ships settle into passive positions around them. He thought about what he had just seen. He thought about how fast it had all changed from battle to calm, from fury to courtesy the moment those children were safe. Other species, when they fought, stayed angry for a while afterward. The adrenaline took time to leave. The heat of it stayed in the room. Soldiers needed to decompress, to shake off the violence, and come back to themselves. The humans had switched off like a light. Not because they had forgotten what happened. He could see it in their movements, in the way they worked, that they remembered perfectly. But the thing that had driven them, the deep and powerful engine behind all of it, had gotten what it needed. The children were safe. The switch had been thrown. Everything else could be handled like reasonable beings. Sorath had fought for 60 years. He had faced many enemies. He had never been more frightened by the end of a battle than he was right now, watching humans be reasonable, because it meant all of that, every bit of it, had been controlled. It had been a choice, the whole time. They could turn it on. They could turn it off. He filed that information away very carefully in the part of his memory, reserved for things that kept him alive. Outside the damaged station, in the quiet and cold of space, 12 children were being checked over by human medical staff one by one. All 12 were unharmed. Mira fell asleep in a medical cot holding her stuffed animal before anyone even finished checking her over. Jonas, the oldest, sat on the edge of a cot and watched the human ships through the porthole. He watched them realign, resupply each other, communicate in short, efficient bursts. He watched what they had done and what they had come back from, and he thought about all of it for a long time. "Did they come because of us?" he asked the medic beside him. The medic looked up from her kit and looked at him and at the ships outside. "Yes," she said simply. Jonas nodded slowly. He looked back at the ships. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." Like something had settled inside him that he had not known was unsettled. He lay back on the cot and closed his eyes. Outside, the stars were very still. What approaches? 3 weeks after the battle at Vareth, 7, the Galactic Concord called an emergency session. The Grand Assembly Hall was one of the largest enclosed spaces in the known galaxy. It had been built to hold representatives from over 200 species. and it usually felt full even when half the seats were empty, because many of the species were large, or they brought staff, or they needed special environmental conditions that required extra equipment. The hall had sections with different atmospheres, different lighting conditions, different temperature zones. It was a complicated place to build, and an even more complicated place to run. On that day, every seat was full. They were there because the Dreth Collective had filed a formal complaint. It stated, in careful and official language, that humanity had responded to a minor territorial dispute with extreme and unprovoked military force, and that this behavior was dangerous to the peace and stability of the Concord. The Dreth representative delivered this complaint with a straight face and an impressive amount of confidence, given that his government had kidnapped 12 children 3 weeks before. Many members of the assembly were sympathetic, not to the kidnapping that had been wrong, and everyone said so, but to the question of proportion. 6 Dreth warships. One situation involving children who had not, in the end, been harmed. Was it really necessary to destroy half a fleet? Was it not perhaps a little excessive? Humanity was new to all of this. Perhaps they had overreacted. Perhaps they needed guidance. A formal note of censure, maybe. Something to remind them that the Concord had rules. The discussion had been going for about 40 minutes when Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo walked to the podium. She had not rushed. She had not pushed to speak early. She had sat in the human section and listened to everything that was said about her people, and her face had shown nothing. When the moderator called on her, she stood up, smoothed her jacket, walked to the front, and stood at the podium in a silence that the entire hall gave to her without being asked. She was a small woman in a room of giants, in every way that phrase could mean. She looked out at 200 species and thousands of eyes and sensory organs and recording devices, and she began to speak. She spoke quietly enough that people had to pay attention to hear her. That was not an accident. She described, briefly and without drama, what had happened. 12 children taken from their school. A priority Omega signal sent. A ship that had burned its own engines to get there in time. A battle that lasted less than 25 minutes. 12 children recovered, unharmed. She laid these facts out the way you lay stones in a row simply, each one in its place. Then she stopped. She looked out at the assembly. You have studied us, she said. For 31 years, since we joined this Concord, many of you have been studying humanity. You have read our biological profiles. You have noted that we lack natural armor, that our bones are easy to break, that we live short lives and are sensitive to temperature and pressure in ways that more resilient species are not. You have measured us and assessed us, and most of you have concluded, reasonably, that we are among the most physically fragile sapient species in recorded history. A pause. You are correct. The hall was very quiet. What your files have not fully captured, she continued, is this. We did not survive by being hard to kill. Plenty of things on our planet were harder to kill than us. Most of them are gone now. We survived because we decided, very early in our history, that there are things we will not allow to happen to the things we love. We decided that no wall is too thick, no enemy too large, no cost too high, when those things are threatened. And we have spent our entire existence getting better at making that decision real. She paused again. She looked around the hall slowly. You have been asking, for 31 years, what humans are. I would like to suggest a different question. Ask what humans protect, because whatever stands between us, and that whatever it is, however large, however well-armed, however certain of its own power, we will go through it. That is not a threat. It is simply the most accurate thing I can tell you about us. She stepped back from the podium. The hall did not erupt into sound the way halls usually do after a speech. It stayed quiet for several seconds. That particular kind of quiet that happens when 200 species are all processing the same thought at the same time. Then the Velhari ambassador Ores, who had been there at Verith, 7, and had moved his ship 3 kilometers away before the shooting started, raised one of his speaking appendages and said, I would like to formally withdraw my support for the Dreth complaint. 3 others followed immediately. Then 7 more. Then the count stopped mattering. The complaint was buried by end of session. The Dreth representative left the hall without speaking to anyone. In the deep archive office of the Concord Intelligence Bureau, Tessivan had spent the 3 weeks since Vareth, 7, doing nothing but rewriting humanity's file. It was a large job. He had needed to go back to the original research, re-examine every assumption, rebuild the analysis from the base up. He had interviewed 17 human crew members who had been at the battle, 3 who had been on the incoming fleet ships, and Ambassador Okonkwo herself, who had answered his questions with great patience and a cup of something she called tea. He had asked her, at the end of the interview, a question that had been bothering him for 3 weeks. The moment the children were safe, he said, everything stopped. The aggression, the battle posture, it disappeared. How? She had looked at him for a moment. Then she said, because the reason for it was gone. We were not angry at the Dreth, Tessivan. We were in the way of something. Once the way was clear, there was nothing to be angry about. He had thought about that for a long time. He thought about it now, putting the final notes into the new classification document. He had restructured the whole file. He had added 12 new subcategories. He had written a 40-page appendix on human protective behavior alone. He had cited the Quorath report, the battle data from Vareth, 7, the historical records, the psychological assessments. He came now to the last field in the classification system, threat tier. He had to assign a number. Every species had a number. For 31 years, humanity had been listed as Class 2, minimal aggressive capacity, low physical threat, diplomatic temperament, no significant military history in interstellar context. He deleted that. He sat for a while, thinking about what tier to assign. The standard system went up to Class 9, which was reserved for species that were considered civilization-ending threats. There were 2 of those on record, and both of them were extinct. Class 8 was for species with weapons capable of planetary destruction. Class 7, for those with proven aggressive expansion records. Humanity did not fit cleanly into any of the existing tiers. They were not aggressive by nature. They had not tried to conquer anyone. They had not built weapons of planetary destruction. By most of the standard metrics, they weren't particularly high on the list. But those metrics had been designed for species that were dangerous in consistent, measurable, predictable ways. Humans were not dangerous in a consistent, measurable, predictable way. They were dangerous in a situational way. They were dangerous in a specific trigger way. And when that trigger was pulled, everything he had read in the archives and seen in the data from Vareth, 7 pointed to the same conclusion. The thing that came out was not limited by the same calculations that limited everyone else. He created a new tier. He labeled it Class Omega. He wrote the definition: non-linear threat escalation, behavior unpredictable by standard models, extreme and decisive response to specific triggers, particularly threats to offspring or protected individuals. Threat level in triggered state exceeds all standard classifications. Threat level in non-triggered state, minimal. Note: the gap between these 2 states is the defining characteristic. Handle with consistent respect, and do not confuse non-triggered state for permanent state. Do not threaten offspring or protected individuals under any circumstances. He added a note in the margin, in his own language. It was personal, not official, and it translated roughly as, they are not dangerous because they are powerful. They are dangerous because they love things. And they are very, very good at war, when love is the reason for it. He submitted the new file. Across the Concord, in offices and aboard ships and in diplomatic stations spread across many star systems, the updated human classification arrived in intelligence feeds. Analysts read it. Some were surprised. Some were not. Several requested the full supporting documentation. One Quorath researcher read the Vareth, 7 battle data 3 times, then sent a message to a colleague that read simply, "We were right. We just didn't know how right." On Vareth, 7, the station was being repaired. The school on level 4 had new windows installed. The observation room where the children liked to press their faces against the glass was fully operational again within a week. Mira was back on her first day. She pressed her face against the glass and looked at the stars, and asked the Velhari maintenance worker beside her if stars were always that color, or if they changed sometimes. He told her they sometimes changed color depending on how old they were. She thought about that. Do they get scared when they get old? She asked. He told her, carefully, that he didn't think stars felt fear. She nodded. Humans get scared sometimes, she said. But then they do the thing anyway. The maintenance worker looked at her. He looked out at the stars. He thought about the unbroken tide arriving at full burn, glowing from the effort, stopping right where it needed to stop. Yes, he said quietly. I know. Far away, in a quiet corner of Dreth space, 3 planned expansion campaigns were cancelled. No official reason was given. The commanders involved simply reviewed their new intelligence briefings, read the updated human classification report, looked at the battle data from Vareth, 7, and made a decision. Some lessons cost a great deal to learn. Some you learn by watching someone else pay the price. The Dreth, for once, chose the cheaper option. The galaxy kept turning. Ships moved between stars. Species argued and traded and built things and broke things and started over again. And somewhere in all of that, humanity went about its life soft, short-lived, endlessly attached to the people around them, smiling too much, counting the fingers of their children at night, pressing their faces against glass to look at stars. Dangerous only when pushed, but very, very good at being pushed.